Um, Today, I will present a joint paper co-authored by Eckhard, Hein, Benjamin Jungmann, and myself. I am Ümit Akcay from IP Berlin. So our topic is financialization and macroeconomic regimes in emerging capitalist economies before and after the global financial crisis or the Great Recession. So before, maybe it's good to it's good to say that at the beginning, our main findings, one of our main findings is that emerging capitalist economies did not follow the same path as the developed capitalist economies after the Great Recession. While there was a clear shift in the demand and growth regimes of developed countries towards more export orientation, the main pattern in the developing world, in the global south, remained the same, and mostly domestic demand models remains in the post-crisis period. Therefore, in our paper, we provide some observations on the puzzle of resilience of these domestic demand-led models. So this is my outline. I will just quickly provide a literature review at the beginning, and then I will summarize the main findings of previous works on the developed countries, developed capitalist economies before and after the crisis. And then I will summarize the main observations about the financialization in the global south and the main indicators about the income distributions. And finally, I will present our findings about changing growth and demand regimes in the pre and post crisis period for 8 large capitalist economies. I decided to skip that part because both Eckhard and the previous speakers summarized the literature, and maybe I can highlight that we still see a gap between post-Keynesian demand and growth regime approach and comparative political economy literature, particularly on the emerging capital.
Ümit, if I may interrupt, we only see the last page of your slides, so page 15. There's
really?
Something wrong.
Yes. On my computer, it is on page 2.
We see page 15 only.
Okay, let me stop and start again sharing. Okay, thank you for reminding. All right. Share screen again. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. And it is on the second page.
Yes.
All right. All right. There must be a problem in the previous. It must be because of my connection. Sorry about that. All right. So I was going to say that we still see a gap between the post-Keynesian demand and growth regime approach and the comparative political economy literature, although there have been some encouraging works for the developed countries. So let me move on to the all right. Okay. Let me move on to our contributions. So Can you see it now? I just want to make sure that it goes well.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So in our paper, we first provide a descriptive analysis for 8 large developing countries, namely Argentina, Brazil, China, India, Mexico, Russia, South Africa, and Turkey. And we try to identify the changes in the growth models before and after the global financial crisis. And on the theoretical level, we try to link this financialization literature to the demand and growth regimes. And finally, on the analytical level, we try to provide a fuller perspective on global imbalances and interplay between different demand and growth regimes globally. So in providing this descriptive analysis, we deliberately limited the scope of the current paper because we thought that it would be a background paper or first step of a broader research agenda. So now I will move on the financialization and growth regimes, mainly for the developed countries, developed capitalist economies. After the crisis of 70s, as you have already known, the capitalist economies have experienced major changes in financial sector and its relationship with the overall economy, including liberalization of financial markets, development of new financial instruments, and the role of finance became more prominent. So these changes have affected macroeconomic performance through 4 channels. First is income distribution. The main trend or tendency is falling wage shares, rising top income shares, and the rising inequality in household income. And again, from a macroeconomic perspective, we can also say that the lower investment in real capital stock has been one of the results of the financialization process, and it has negatively affected aggregate demand and growth, either directly by decreasing investment in capital stock or indirectly by redistributing income to groups with lower propensity to consume in mostly wage-led economies. If when we consider the consumption channel, so we can see we can identify 2 extreme demand regimes, demand and growth regimes. In some countries, the shortfall in investment and income finance consumption has been compensated by wealth-based and debt finance consumption. On the other hand, in other countries facing rising income inequality and dampened real investment, have been relying on net exports to generate growth. Therefore, we have 2 opposing the growth regimes. And these 2 growth regimes have generated complementary external account position for these 2 groups. As for the empirical strategy, we decided, we implemented the previous works of Hein and others. And in this procedure, we use fiscal balances and the growth contributions of the main demand aggregates. So looking at these 2 sets of indicators provides some information about the main sources of demand and growth, and on how demand is financed and related deficit dynamics on the relevant country. So we have 4 different types. as for our classification, while first two are more export-oriented. The last two are more domestic demand-led oriented regimes. So let me just summarize the main findings of the previous works focusing on mostly advanced countries, mature capitalist countries. And we have two periods. First period is pre-crisis period, and the second is post-2007 and 9 crisis periods. So what we see here is that export-led mercantilist countries before the crisis have mainly maintained this regime or turned weakly export-led after. And if we look at the export-led regimes, we see the similar pattern. But the main change is for the debt-led private demand regimes. And they shifted towards export-led mercantilist regimes or weakly export-led regime. So this is a clear shift, and the main maybe reason for this shift is, of course, the austerity policies implemented in mostly Eurozone countries. And these austerity policies made imports collapse, and by this way, net exports rise and current accounts in these countries improve, and in several cases even turn positive. And one of the results of this polarization in the post-crisis regimes has been the weak capital accumulation and growth after the crisis, and this reintroduced this secular stagnation debate recently. So looking at this main trends in the developed countries, of course, does not provide the full picture for us. Therefore, in the next section, I will try to summarize the main dynamics in the emerging capitalist economies with our 8 samples. Again, I will not give a comprehensive literature review, but I just want to mention that in emerging or in the global south, financialization has multiform manifestation, which means there are different forms, and maybe the concept of variegated financialization can capture this aspect. But of course, both subordinate financialization and dependent financialization concepts have been used for explaining or covering the main tendencies in these countries. So let me summarize some of the main features for financialization experiences of these countries. First, similar to the main trends in the global north, financialization has also caused lower investment in the real capital stock in global south countries. And as the non-financial corporations' investment decisions have shifted from long-term fixed investment projects to short-term financial investments in these countries. Secondly, maybe the most important one for these countries, the hierarchical nature of the global monetary and financial system. So this hierarchical structure basically forces global South countries to offer higher interest rates to attract foreign capitals. And then this higher interest rates, the hierarchical system also creates an incentive structure for economic units in these countries to demand a hard currency for their operations, and this led to dollarization or euroization in these countries. Also, this structurally higher interest rates is further detrimental to the investment trends in these countries. And as for the global financial cycles, it's in the expansion period. It's this concept links the main trends in the capital accumulation of the core countries to the periphery, let's say. In the expansion period, which started with the lowering interest rates of the United States, and this led capital flows to the global South, which can trigger the household financialization in 2000s in many global South countries. However, this has some shortcomings. For example, overvalued foreign exchange, overvalued currency may result in the premature deindustrialization, as Danny Roderick mentioned, or it may undermine the industrial capacity of these countries, which can lead to a higher current account deficit or rising foreign exchange debt of non-financial corporations. And in the contraction period of the global financial cycles, the mechanism works in the opposite way. So higher interest rates in the developed countries may result in capital outflows from the periphery, and which can trigger sudden stops in the global South. This happened lately in 2018 in Argentina and Turkey, for example. And when there is a currency crisis, these countries, rapid depreciation or devaluation of national currency translated into rising inflation in these countries, and then these countries are forced to increase interest rates, which can trigger again credit crunches and recessions. Therefore, these reliance on the capital flows created a structural instability for these countries. This is maybe the main feature of the financialization experiences. Before summarizing our main findings about the changes in the growth regimes, I would like to mention some trends in the distribution for these countries. With a few exceptions, our 8 samples show a similar pattern regarding the income distribution for the first period before the crisis, falling wage shares, rising top income shares, and rising Gini coefficients for personal household distribution of income. However, in the second period, post-crisis period, the main pattern of distribution becomes more diverse. For example, in Brazil, Argentina, China, South Africa, and Turkey, we observe a trend of wage share to rise, which can have some implications for the changing growth regimes. Let me move to my final table, which shows a shift of demand and growth regimes in emerging capitalist economies. So when we look at this table, there are maybe 2 important points. The pattern is more diverse than the advanced countries. for example, only Russia and Mexico in our sample have become more export-oriented. Russia here and Mexico here, they became more export-oriented. And for other countries, regimes turn less export-oriented. This is an interesting point. For South Africa, the demand and growth regime did not change, and India, there was no regime change either. However, in Argentina and Brazil, they were both export-led countries before the crisis. However, they turned into a domestic demand-led regime with high public deficit. Even China has turned to a weakly export-led regime after the crisis. And Turkey has a similar pattern. Still, domestic demand dominates the growth, but public sector debt is replaced by private sector debt in the second period. Therefore, let me summarize our main findings. So, Global South did not follow the same path of the Global North, let's say, in the post-crisis period regarding the demand and growth regimes. While there was a clear shift in the Global North, basically in the Europe, regarding the demand and growth regimes, continuation of the domestic demand-led regimes, or even turn from export-led mercantilist to weakly export-led regimes in China can be identified for these countries. We have some general or broader observations about the reasons. Improved income distribution in some countries may help to stabilize the income finance domestic demand. This can be a reason. And also internal devaluation through wage moderation or even wage cuts was not the strategy of choice in these countries, at least so far. This was the case for the Europe example. And maybe we have seen a further increase in dependent financialization in several countries of the Global South, together with the low interest rate policies and the multiple waves of quantitative easing programs of the Fed. And this made several emerging capitalist economies follow a debt-led regime after the crisis. Finally, we argue that this global regime pattern and the persistence of the current imbalances contains the roots of future instabilities, both for debt-led emerging capitalist economies and for the global economy as a whole. Okay, thank you very much for your patience, and then you can find more details about data and literature in our paper already published in the IP website.